Hello, my name is Melanie Foltz, and I am speaking today to tell you about Harriet Tubman's life and accomplishments. My goal is to inform my audience of how Harriet Tubman used her freedom from slavery to become a great humanitarian and leading abolitionist in the fight against slavery. Harriet Tubman was born Araminta Ross in the year 1820 as a second-generation slave. In 1849, Harriet escaped to freedom in Philadelphia all alone with only the North Star to guide her way. After her escape, Harriet became a famous conductor of the Underground Railroad, which helped other slaves escape to freedom in the northern states. Harriet also helped the Union Army during the Civil War as both a nurse and a spy. In her later years, she was a great humanitarian who fought for social reform for African Americans. Based on my research of Harriet Tubman, I present information about her life that illustrates the variety of ways in which she helped slaves find freedom in the North and how she continued helping them until the very day that she died. In her quest to help slaves find freedom, Harriet Tubman became a huge contributor to the abolition of slavery and became a great humanitarian. During the minutes that follow, I will tell you how Tubman helped to free many slaves in the South and how her work as a humanitarian helped to care for them after they were free. She did this by working as a conductor of the Underground Railroad, by helping Union soldiers during the Civil War, and by dedicating her life to caring for the African Americans who achieved freedom. Harriet Tubman became a famous conductor of the Underground Railroad in the 1800s. She risked her life to free other slaves because she herself had been victim to the abuse and brutality of slave life. As a child, Tubman was hired out as a nursemaid. She was forced to stay awake all night to keep the baby from crying. If she fell asleep, she was viciously whipped and beaten by the baby's mother. She was also severely injured by an overseer when she refused to participate in the punishment of another slave. She was hit in the head with an iron weight intended for the other slave, and she remained unconscious for days. Harriet suffered from this injury for the rest of her life. She would have periods where she would fall into deep sleeps and not wake up for days at a time, and she would also have seizures. After Tubman achieved her own freedom, she returned 19 times into slave country by 1860. During these trips, she successfully rescued over 300 slaves. Out of these 300 slaves were her sister, her brother, and even her 70-year-old parents. Tubman always delivered her passengers safely, and she became known as the Moses of her people. And now I'm going to show you some things that I have. I actually have here a copy of the newspaper article that shows when Harriet actually ran away as a slave, back when her name was still Minty. And this is a picture of Harriet Tubman, pictured with some of the people she helped actually escape from the Underground Railroad. And this little article right here is actually, it's a diagram of the actual route that she would take down the river from Philadelphia all the way into Maryland. And if they had been caught, this is what would have been their fate. They would have been chained up, put in prison, taken back, and severely beaten like this man was. According to the Moreland Springard Research Center, Tubman devised clever techniques to avoid being caught on these journeys. She always traveled under the cover of darkness on Saturday nights because runaway notices could not be put in the paper until Monday. She used the master's horse and buggy for the first part of the journey, and she carried with her a drug to use on babies so that their cries would not put them in danger. She always carried a gun with her, and she told the slaves who threatened to turn back, "You will either be free or you will die a slave." So she was going to kill them if they ever tried to turn back. By 1856, Tubman's capture would have brought a $40,000 reward from the South. On one occasion, she overheard some men reading her wanted poster, which stated that she was an illiterate woman. After hearing this, she pulled out a book and pretended to read it. This was actually enough to fool these men into believing that she was not Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman also aided in the freedom of slaves by working for the Union Army during the Civil War. According to Kate Larson, who wrote the Harriet Tubman biography, Bound for the Promised Land, Tubman's experience with the Underground Railroad, combined with her passion and commitment to fight for freedom, brought her to the attention of the Massachusetts Governor John Andrew. In 1862, he arranged for her to travel to South Carolina to aid in the Union war effort. He believed that her abilities to move in and out of hostile territory without detection would be a valuable asset. She was able to gather information effectively on rebel troop activities, and she was even given Secret Service money to bribe scared informants and support her in her group of scouts. On the night of June 2nd, 1863, Harriet and Colonel James Montgomery, accompanied by 150 black soldiers, led a raid on the Combahee River in South Carolina. They traveled the river at nightfall. One of the ships actually broke down and had to return, but the other two carried on, and by dawn, combat on the river had broken out. But do you think that Harriet Tubman stood by and let the men lead the troops into battle? She did not. She actually led a group of soldiers right into that battle. The Union forces created havoc and they devastated the area. Many of the plantations, such as the Middleton and Hayward plantations, were left in ruin. The word was passed along to the slaves that the ships were Lincoln's gunboats coming to set them free. The overseers were not able to control the slaves as they ran for the boats, including women holding tight to their children. In all, over 800 slaves were freed and no one was harmed on the side of the Union troops. The success of the mission was due entirely to Harriet Tubman's troop of scouts who had surveyed the area earlier for the Union Army. Tubman also worked as a nurse during the Civil War. Many in the hospitals were dying from diseases such as dysentery, which is associated with horrific diarrhea. She was convinced she could cure the sick if only she could find these special roots and herbs that grew in Maryland. One night she searched the wood until she found the lilies and the cranbills. She boiled them into a bitter brew, which she gave to a dying man. Amazingly, the man slowly but surely recovered. Tubman saved many people in her lifetime. On her grave, her tombstone simply reads, "Servant of God, well done." Harriet Tubman also became a great humanitarian by continuing to help the African American people after they gained their freedom. According to Earl Conrad, who wrote the article, General Tubman, after the Civil War, the Negroes were striving for readjustment. Soon many were aged, maimed, or impoverished and were coming to Harriet in need. Harriet, being the incredible woman that she was, welcomed them in. She planted a large garden to feed her new housemates, and she went to her rich Republican friends in need of money, food, and clothing, which they supplied her with. And when money was lacking, she sold copies of her own biography and gave speeches for extra funds. She was denied a pension for her military service, but she eventually was awarded $25 a month for the rest of her life for her service in the war. Harriet Tubman dedicated her whole life to social reform to help improve the quality of life for African Americans. Harriet raised money for 2 schools for freedmen in the South, and before long she was the sole supporter of these schools. Harriet Tubman also helped to establish the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church. She worked on behalf of women's suffrage and opened the Harriet Tubman Home for the Aged, where she worked until her death in 1913. As you can see, Harriet Tubman was the portrait of an American hero. In her quest to help slaves find freedom, Harriet Tubman became a key contributor in the abolition of slavery and a great humanitarian. Tubman dedicated her life to helping other African Americans by working the Underground Railroad, aiding the Union Army in the Civil War, and caring for the slaves even after they gained their freedom. According to Margaret Driggs, who wrote the article They Call Her Moses, Harriet Tubman died a penniless woman at the age of 93, but she was a free American and she was surrounded by the people she had delivered from bondage. Her death made headlines around the world. She may have died a penniless woman, but the legacy she left behind was worth more than money.